Is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau jeopardizing Canada's relationship with the United States? Alberta Premier Danielle Smith certainly seems to think so. That's because as Donald Trump has signaled the need for energy security in the US and plans to do that with his incoming administration, Justin Trudeau is focused on emissions cap that, according to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, would make it harder for Alberta to get their product to markets like the US. Now, the Alberta Premier has signaled that she's going to forge ahead with her own relationship with the United States, leaving Ottawa aside. And so I didn't think it was possible, but with that, Justin Trudeau's image on the world stage has diminished even further. I'm Rachel Parker, and you're watching Rachel and the Republic. Hey everyone, welcome back to Rachel and the Republic. I'm your host, Rachel Parker. As you guys know, I have covered Alberta politics for a very long time, and when I left my old show, The Alberta Roundup, I promised you guys that you would not be missing me, but that you would actually be benefiting from even more Alberta coverage because the new host, Isaac Lamoureux, is obviously continuing that show and doing an excellent job of that. But I told you that I would still occasionally dive into an Alberta story on my other shows from time to time. And so we are going to be talking about the Canadian US trade relationship today, but taking a specific look at Alberta's role in this because Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has been making some very interesting comments in the days since Donald Trump was elected to be the next president of the United States. As you all know, the trading relationship between Canada and the United States is very important. Those involved with it often say it's one of the greatest examples of a trading relationship in the world. And now people in Canada, politicians in Canada, are wondering how they're going to respond to Donald Trump's threats of imposing a 10% tariff on products coming into the United States. Alberta has quite the advantage here. I don't think this is technically what is meant by the Alberta advantage, but we have the advantage that the rest of the world wants our oil exports. And the United States receives a host of Alberta exports. And so Danielle Smith is hoping to use America's need for our oil to essentially negotiate an agreement in which Alberta is not subject and our energy exports are not subject to that 10% tariff. She's been asked about this repeatedly. And while she's asked about this, she's also asked if she plans on using Alberta's exports to kind of give all of Canada a greater negotiating position. If, for example, if America still wants the valuable Alberta energy exports, maybe Donald Trump has to soften his position on tariffs across the board for other industries in other parts of the country. And the Alberta Premier has made it very clear that Ottawa, and certainly Justin Trudeau, is not interested in a Team Canada approach because Justin Trudeau continues to forge ahead with his emissions cap. This is something you've probably heard the Premier talk about before. We'll just touch a little bit about what that emissions cap would do. We're still waiting for the exact specifics of the numbers for the cap, but essentially, the Trudeau Liberals have proposed beginning it in 2030 with the goal of reducing emissions by 40 to 45% from 2005 levels by 2030. Now, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is not exactly opposed to reducing carbon footprints, unlike some conservative politicians or even some conservatives in the province, don't want her to talk about carbon neutrality. She thinks that it is possible, but she has long expressed that we need a larger timeline. She's often talked about 2050 as being a place where companies would then have the technology that they would be able to reduce their carbon footprint. And she says that 2030, 2035, that's too soon, and that the industry simply cannot meet that target. And she says that so long as Justin Trudeau is continuing to move ahead with his plans for emissions cap, it is not possible for Alberta to have a Team Canada approach in which she would use Alberta Energy to advocate for the rest of Canada and for advocate and to help Ottawa as they negotiate with Donald Trump and with his administration. Here's Alberta Premier Danielle Smith explaining her position to Vashi Kapelos of CTV News. Take a listen.
Not bending on some of the direction they've taken. It will jeopardize our relationship with the United States, which is the largest trading relationship that we have, not only Alberta, but all of our provincial counterparts. We know one of the things that the new White House wants is energy security. We have the ability to offer that. And if you put on the table an emissions cap, which we know will cause a cap in production, you're not going to be able to negotiate in a way that's going to be best for Canada. So if they want to have a Team Canada approach, it means the emissions cap has to be off the table.
So Danielle Smith is certainly correct in her assessment that the Donald Trump administration is interested in energy security in the US. They want to be drilling more, they want to be supplying more of their own energy as opposed to sourcing it from other countries, including unethical oils that they receive from places like Iran and Saudi Arabia. And so the Trump administration has signaled that they are interested, that that's the direction they're going to be taking. And Donald Trump made this stance very clear when he announced that he would be appointing an oil executive, Chris Wright, to lead the energy department in the U.S. Now, if you're wondering a little bit who Chris Wright is, it really signals how seriously Trump is taking this need for energy security in the U.S. and how the climate crisis is definitely not a top priority for the Trump administration. Chris Wright is actually somebody who said that there is no climate crisis. He's been a very vocal critic of the efforts to fight climate change, and he's a long-standing critic of these efforts. So it's with that decision, as with so many of the other decisions that the Trump administration has made, he's signaling the direction that the U.S. is planning to go in. Now, in terms of Canada and its relationship with the United States, Danielle Smith is going to be, working her best to secure her own deal with the United States to ensure that Alberta and its energy exports, as I said, are not subject to these tariffs. Danielle Smith has even said she'll be going down to the inauguration in the U.S., to President Trump's inauguration. She announced that this week, and that she's working on building her own relationships. She expressed this further in an interview with CBC. Take a listen.
First on this to ensure that your energy products aren't tariffed, or does the access to your energy become part of the Team Canada conversation about ensuring all sectors of the economy are not subject to any kind of new tariffs?
I would love a Team Canada approach, but look, we're not going to allow for an emissions cap to have any role in reducing our production. And so if the federal government is insistent upon going down that pathway, then we'll take care of our own interests. I would like our interests to align with the federal government. I've told them so. I've told them that dropping the emissions cap is part and parcel of being able to do that. They have been unresponsive so far, but I think they need to recalibrate the relationship with the United States. We know what the United States wants. They want the federal government to meet its 2% NATO commitment, and they want to be able to participate with us in energy security. If those are the two things that we have to bring to the table, then you don't come to the table with an emissions cap. So that's part of the reason why we are going to be as collaborative as we can with the federal government approach. But we absolutely will defend our own interests and make our own relationships if we have to.
So what you can hear there is you can hear the premier. She's being, very democratic about what she's saying. She's saying, yeah, I would like to have a Team Canada approach with Ottawa. But if you really cut through what she's saying, she's getting to the point and she's saying Alberta is going to be defending its own interests, and we're going to be forging ahead and building our own relationships with the United States. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but Alberta already has a trade ambassador based in DC, someone who lives in DC full time, ensuring that we have good trade relationships with the United States, someone who's based there full time to represent the Alberta government. And, I've posted some videos on X of James Bazan, the current trade relationship ambassador there in the US, who's now, especially in the limelight and has to build relationships with the new Trump administration. And as I said, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith will be attending Trump's inauguration. So this is something that we can see Danielle Smith taking very seriously. And she signals exactly what it is that Ottawa is looking for. They want Canada to meet our NATO targets, and they are interested in energy security, which are two things that Ottawa could easily provide for the United States if they were taking this issue seriously and if they wanted to have a good relationship with the Trump administration. Which seems unlikely given that they have announced that Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland is going to be the one heading up negotiations with the Trump administration. I covered this a little bit last week. It seems like that was an ironic pick at best, given that Donald Trump has already said he doesn't like Chrystia Freeland. He said that he doesn't like Canada's negotiator when they were negotiating the new NAFTA. And of course, at the time, that was Chrystia Freeland. So it does seem like an interesting pick from the Trump from the Trudeau, from Team Trudeau, to signal that Chrystia Freeland was going to be the one heading up these negotiations when she already has a rocky relationship with Donald Trump, so much so that he just says that he doesn't even like her, which I know most of you in the audience will be signaling your agreement with. She is a rather difficult personality and comes across kind of just annoying. She was asked about how she's going to respond to the Trump administration and why she was the best person to head up these negotiations, given the president-elect's past comments about her. Take a listen to what she had to say.
Donald Trump has said he doesn't like you very much. Donald Trump has said that he doesn't like you very much in the past. What makes you the best person to lead the Canadian government's efforts here?
I think that President Trump will obviously speak for himself, and I would never put words in his mouth. But in my experience, President Trump respects strength, and he respects people and countries who are strong and clear in defending their countries, in defending their national interest. That's what I've always done, and that's what I will continue to do.
I know I played that clip for you guys last week. I'm sure some of you will have complaints about having to hear from Chrystia Freeland 2 weeks in a row, and I did definitely cut it short for this week. But just to hear the irony of what she's saying, I think it's important to point it out once again when she's saying Donald Trump respects people who stand up for their own national interests and who project strength. Two things that Chrystia Freeland and, to a latter extent, the Trudeau Liberals seem incapable of doing. They do not project strength. They seem incapable of standing up for their own national interests. If you were interested in defending your country, I think you would, at the very minimum, meet your NATO commitments. And we haven't seen that under this administration. We haven't seen a willingness to do that. Even now with President-elect, as Alberta Premier Danielle Smith rightly pointed out, Canada could offer the United States things that the United States wants and needs from Canada. And they are reluctant to do so because they are so busy spending government dollars on other things that do not benefit Canadians or our national interest. And so we'll leave that with you. Chrystia Freeland is going to be heading up these negotiations. I suspect that it won't go very well for her. I'm certainly looking forward to the change in government and hopefully the renewed efforts that Canada's negotiator will bring along with them when we see a change in those positions. Just to close it off for this week, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith was asked about how she would, if she was willing to have this Team Canada approach. And she said that's something that we would like to have, but it's just not possible because we've told the federal government time and time again that we will not accept this emissions cap. We are not going to reduce production in Alberta's oil and energy industry. And she was pressed a little bit further about this in her interview on CTV. And essentially, she got to the point where she said, this is something that Justin Trudeau is not willing to budge on. And I think that that's so indicative of this current government. They seem very unwilling to acknowledge when mistakes have been made and very slow to course correct. It seems to be sort of a new and modern phenomena that no matter how unhappy a nation is, government, they have their ideological drive, and they will continue to pursue. They will continue to pursue that agenda no matter how unpopular it is, and no matter if it's really what the people want or not. I suspect that part of the reason for that is because they feel some moral superiority with that agenda, and so even if people are suffering, they're hell-bent on continuing to push through that agenda, even if it means that Canadians are struggling, as we talk about extensively on the show, with the high cost of inflation. Justin Trudeau knows that he's not liked. He knows that he's down in the polls. I mean, part of it is that he's, I would assume, very narcissistic, and that he's unwilling to step aside even when his own caucus has asked him to step aside. But part of it is, I would say, that they feel that they have a moral superiority to continue pushing through these policies that Canadians don't want and didn't vote for, as evidenced in the low poll numbers that the Trudeau Liberals have, and in the fact that they are trying to continuously secure these agreements with the NDP and with the Bloc to keep them in power in return for giving the parties what they want rather than giving Canadians what they want and they need. I think the best example of this in recent history is when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau essentially said that climate change is more important than feeding your kids. I'm sure you guys caught this one, but if not, take a listen. I saw the caption for it. I assumed his words were being taken out of context, and then I heard it for myself. Take a look.
It's really, really easy when you're in a short-term survive. I got to be able to pay the rent this month. I got to be able to buy groceries for my kids to say, okay, let's put climate change as a slightly lower priority. And that's something that's instinctive. When the storm comes, you want to hunker down and just sort of huddle up and wait for it to blow over. We can't do that around climate change.
Truly shocking stuff, and I have to note that the irony of that is that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was recently in Brazil and he brought his daughter. I mean, nothing necessarily wrong with that. There was some criticism that he appeared to be skipping some of the events while he was out walking on the beach with his daughter. But the irony of telling Canadians that, climate change should be just as important to them as feeding your kids, while your daughter is able to travel around on a private jet paid for by the Canadian taxpayer, and you have the audacity to tell Canadians that climate change, really should be as important as putting food on the table for your kids. Totally out of touch. All right, everyone, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you think that this is good news for Alberta, that the Premier has signaled that it will be forging its own relationship with the United States? What could that mean for Alberta's future? And do you think that the rest of Canada is going to get on board, or do you think that they are going to be left behind as Alberta uses its oil advantage to secure a strong relationship with the United States? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'll be sure to take a look at some of those. I hope that you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you next week. God bless.